Hello everybody, my name is Walter and this is episode 75 of my Redstone Commands Series. In this episode I'm going to cover the Dialog command as well as dialogs in general, which are a very powerful tool when you're working on interactive data packs or minigames. But what actually are dialogs? Well, to make it simple, they are customizable menus you can create based on certain templates and then use to just inform the player or give them buttons they can click on to execute predefined commands. They can be either defined using the dialog command, or you can also have them as part of a Datapack predefined, which then can be found in a data namespace dialog subfolder as .json files. And with that, let's have a quick look at the command itself. So here you have basically two options. We can either show a dialog to one or multiple players, or we can forcefully close dialogs for one or multiple players. To show a dialog, we start with the name of the command, dialog, then a keyword show, and then we need to specify the players we want to target. And these must be players. So you can use player names, target selectors, or unique identifiers. But if you're using target selectors, it must be either self, nearest player, all players, or if you, for whatever reason, want to use the all entities, then it has to be type player. Otherwise, the command will not execute. Once you have the targets, you can define either directly the dialog using the simplified NBT syntax or JSON syntax if you want. Or you can reference a predefined dialog from a Datapack. So namespace and then the name of the dialog. This, since it's a .json file, needs to follow the strict JSON syntax. If you want to forcefully close the dialog for a player, you can use dialog and then clear, and then again you specify one or multiple players. So just a few quick examples. So here I'm just opening a simple notice with the title hello. So dialog show itself, and then the dialog definition, and here we have the hello, and that's already it. This here opens a predefined dialog in my main menu Datapack called chat formatter, and if I do this, I get into this slightly more complex example we will come to at the end of this video. And then if we want to clear it, okay, dialog clear, and in this case I'm targeting everyone. And yeah, this is just me, but we don't really see a difference since, well, I wasn't in any dialog. So that's the basic syntax. Now, before we get to the details of the dialog definition, let's have a quick look at predefined or default dialogs and dialog tags. So when on a multiplayer server, then the server operators may provide you with a list of links, so bug tracker, announcement, and so on. And these can be found now in a predefined dialog called Minecraft server links, which, as I said, is customizable by the server operators on the server side. And if it's filled in, then it automatically gets added to the pause screen additions tag. What this is, we will come to in a second. There are additionally two dialog tags. They can be found in Datapacks in the data Minecraft tags dialog subfolder. And they are either pause screen .json, pause screen additions .json, and quick options .json. The first, let me show you this in action. So the first will replace this button here, which usually is leading to the bug tracker or the send feedback button, to the specified dialog. So here we have my chat formatter from before again. And if I had more than one dialog in this tag, then I would first get into a selection menu, and from there I could select, for example, the chat formatter. So the pause screen additions allows you to add dialogs directly to the main or pause menu. The quick options is similar, but here it allows you to access those dialogs via the keybind, which as a default is G. So here I'm now just pressing G, and I'm directly in the chat formatter since I only have one custom dialog in this tag. But if I had more, then I would first get again into a selection menu. The content of those is just a simple JSON tag, so nothing really surprising here. So following that, let's have a look at defining dialogs. Now earlier when I was talking about the command, I mentioned that the direct definition uses SNBT syntax or simplified NBT syntax, and the definition in .json files in Datapacks uses JSON syntax. We can also use JSON syntax for the direct definition. This automatically gets translated by the game into SNBT. And the only real difference between the two, if you don't know it, is that around those keywords here, you have those quotation marks. This is JSON syntax. If you leave out the quotation marks, then it's SNBT. That's the only real difference. Since JSON works in both cases, I'm going with that one for this tutorial here. But you can also use SNBT if you're directly in the dialog command. Now, with that out of the way, let's have a look at the definition. So first of all, this is a big compound. So we have those fancy brackets around the entire definition. And then all of the various options separated by commas. Then, the first required argument you should have is type. This can be one of 5. Notice, confirmation, server links, dialog list, or multi-action. This defines later on which type of actions are actually available, or in other words, which type of interactive buttons you have at the bottom of your screen. Then you need to define the title. This is the text at the top of your menu. This can be just plain text, or JSON text, or even an array of JSON text. Then the first option argument, external title. This is the text displayed on a button in another menu leading to this menu. So as an example, here this open chat formatter, this would be the external title, and then chat formatter here, this would be the internal or the title. If it's not defined, then it defaults to the title. Then you can define whether you can close this menu with the escape button. This is per default set to true. If it's set to false, then you can't leave the menu via the escape button. That's the only real difference. You can also define whether the game is supposed to pause in single player when you are in the menu. This is per default set to true. If it's set to false, then the game continues running in the background. Then, and I will go into the details later on, you can define a body and inputs. Body are optionally text and item icons you can display above the inputs and the buttons, which can be either a single entry or it can be a list of body elements. Similarly, inputs are also optional, can be an array of one or multiple input elements. Again, more information about this later. Then we have after action, again optional. You can define whether you want to close the menu after a button was clicked. So this is the default value. You can also trigger nothing, so the menu remains open. Or you can switch to a waiting for response window. So that might be of interest if you have some kind of mod running in the background and it just needs time to execute whatever is triggered. And then finally, we have our type-specific actions, which we will come to on the next few pages. So, with that said, let's have a look at first the Minecraft notice type. So this is a dialog with a single button at the bottom. And if we don't define any action, since this is, as you can see, optional, then it uses the GUI.no as a default. So here is the example, Minecraft notice, title is just hello and nothing else. So we have the hello at the top and we have an OK button at the bottom and nothing happens. And if I click escape or click on it, then nothing happens. So we can also define the action. This will also be used as the exit action. So we can somewhat force the player to execute a command or he won't be able to get out of our notice. So that can be a second use of this. So action, and then in a compound, we have first a label, which we have to have. This is the text on top of the button. Then we can define a tooltip, which is a text that we get when we are hovering above the button. We can define how wide the button is supposed to be with width, so which is a number between 1 and 1024 inclusive. The default value would be 150 here. And then we have the option to define an action, so execute a command or whatever. More about this we will come to later. And here, just an example. So Minecraft notice, simple welcome. We have a label, we have a tooltip, we have a width, and we have an action. So the full options there. You can see welcome at the top. We have our labeled button and a hover event. And if we click here, we would have this command executed, which will also happen if we click the escape button. So there is no simple way to get out of it without executing this command, or alternatively, clicking up here and leaving the world. So you can really force the players to actually execute this command. So it might be interesting for certain types of maps and minigames, I guess. So then Minecraft confirmation. This is pretty much the same, but now we have two buttons and the actions are no longer optional. So we have a yes option and a no option or action. The internals are the same as before. So label, optional tooltip with an action, and no is just analog. So I left it out here, but it works exactly the same. So example, we have confirmation. We have a yes with a label and an action, and a no with just a label. And totally forgot to mention, the no is also used as the exit action. So if we click on escape, if there's an action in there, then that will be executed. So let's execute this, and you can see, give Yusuf a diamond. I can either nope out, or I can say, yeah, give me a diamond, and then I have a diamond. So server links. This is a bit more interesting, I guess. So we have, first of all, at the top, basically, the server provided links. So this is not something we can define on the client side where we are currently. But what we can define optionally is in how many columns we want this all to be displayed, which is per default set to 2, but can be more. We can also define how wide those buttons should be. Again, a number between 1 and 1024. Little side warning here. If you set the number of columns too high and the button width too high, you might not be able to actually see some of those buttons. So be aware of that. Then, optionally, you can define an exit action. And only if this is defined, you actually will have a button at the very bottom. Otherwise, you can only really leave it with the escape button, I guess. And the content, again, is just label tooltip with an action as before. So this is pretty much the same structure for all possible actions. Yeah, and here you can see server links, my server links, and then exit action is just a label. You can see down here we have our exit action. And yeah, if I click on exit, then this will also execute. So yeah, then dialog list. This is basically a dialog of dialogues. So here that would be something like this here, which leads to other dialogues. And subsequently, the structure is very similar to the server link. So you can see the bottom is the same. We only have now a mandatory dialogues entry. And that can be either a single dialog or a list of dialogues, which need to be referred to via namespace ID, or you can also use dialog tags here. In the wiki, or according to the wiki, you can also use dialog definitions directly here, but I wasn't able to get this working. So either I'm just didn't really figure out how to do it, or the wiki is not entirely accurate there. So yeah, and yeah, here's the example. So dialog list, my list of dialogues, and I have 3 dialogues in there. So my main menu chat formatter, Minecraft server links, and Minecraft custom options, which is the tag we have had earlier. Exit action is just a label and 1 column and rather wide buttons. And here we have it. So we have our 3 dialogues, and I can either go directly in there, or I can go to server links. Yeah, and in this case, the back button doesn't work since it's not with any kind of action in the background. And yeah, the custom options work the same. So that is dialog list. And that brings me to the last and most interesting one, I guess, and that is multi-action. With this dialog, you can have as many buttons as you want. You can have just 1 button or, well, a lot of buttons. The structure is again very similar to before. We don't have a button width since basically each of those actions has its own width. So we have, let's start at the bottom. Again, optionally our exit action. If this is not available or not set, then we don't have a button at the very bottom. We can say how many columns we have, and then we define how many actions or how many single buttons we want. And each of those is again an action. So we have for each of those a compound with label, tooltip, width, and action. Those three again optional. And all of this in a list. So big list, and at least one action is defined or one button is defined in there. I hope this was not too confusing. So example, so we have a multi-action with a title gimme. And in the actions, we have a label diamond with a corresponding action, then a label emerald with a corresponding action, and then we have a label gold with a corresponding action. And if we trigger this, you can see we have this menu here. You can see each of those here leads me to a corresponding give command. I can also just use the exit button, and then I will just leave the whole thing. I didn't define an exit action, so nothing happens. And we also didn't have any button at the very bottom. Next up, we have the earlier skipped body elements. So this is basically a list of one or multiple elements, which are all compounds, either with type Minecraft plain message or type Minecraft item. Let's start with the plain message. So this, as I said, is a compound. Type is Minecraft plain message, and then it needs a field contents, which is JSON text. So it can be just plain text, can be JSON text, even an array of JSON text. You can get fancy here. Except this doesn't support, at least currently to my knowledge, MBT, score, and selector JSON elements. So if you want to display the score value for a given player, that wouldn't work, unfortunately. You can also additionally define how wide this text is supposed to be. The full value here are 200. And you can add more of this even intermixed with items. So let's have a look at an example. So here we have a body with a plain message. And this is a thin text with a width of 25. Here you can see this is really a thin text. Then, next up, the type Minecraft item. Again, big compound. And here, once you have the type defined, you need to define the item. This again is a compound, which at least contains the ID of the item. So for example, Minecraft diamond, wooden shovel, and so on. You can also add things like the count, which default-wise is just set to 1. And then you can add further components. So you can basically add NBT data like the lore, glint, and so on. You can also add a description, which is text to the side of the icon, which can be either just plain JSON text again, so plain text, JSON text, array of JSON text. Again, it doesn't support NBT, score, or selector components. Or alternatively, to just directly defining it, you can also have a sub compound with contents again, which similar to before JSON text or whatever. And again, optionally the width. Then you can define whether decorations, so item count, damage bar are visible. Per default, this is the case. And you can also set this to false. Similarly, you can define whether the tooltips, so the lore is actually visible. This per default is set to true. And then you can also say how wide and how high the icon is supposed to be. This is a number between 1 and 256 with a default of 16 in each case. And yeah, let's have a look at an example. So here we have item. We have a body with an item. Minecraft diamond. The lore is set, and we have a description to the side. And if we trigger this, you can see we have our description, and we have our Hoa event or lore in there. And we can even click on this, although nothing happens. Yeah, that is basically the body. Now, next up, let's have a look at the possible inputs. So again, inputs is a list of compounds of various types. And each has a type, a key, and a label, and then type-specific fields. So we have 4 types. Minecraft text, Boolean, single option, and number range. We will come to those in more detail in a minute. Then each needs a key. This is basically the name of this input field. That can be later on be used to reference to the value you have input. So example, when you're using it as part of a command. This only allows, by the way, letters, digits, and the underscore. So you are somewhat limited in how you can name those things. Then we have the label, which is the text displayed on or above or to the side of the input element. And then, as I said, we have type-specific fields. So let's have a look at the first example, which is the Minecraft text. So this is usually a single line text. You can, as you can see, all of those is optional. Define the initial value. So you can prefill the text window. And this is again simple text or a simple string, this time not JSON. Plain text, nothing else. Then you can define whether the label we give over here is actually visible. This per default is set to true. You can set it to false and blank out the label basically. You can define how long your input is allowed to be. So default-wise, you can only input 32 letters or characters. But you can obviously go higher than this. I'm not aware of a maximum number here, by the way. You can also define how wide the text is supposed to be in, I think it's pixel or something like that. Default value here is 200 again. And then, if you don't want single line but multi-line, you can do this. What you need for that is a field called multi-line, which is a compound. And in this compound, you can then optionally define max lines. So how many lines your multi-line allows for and how high it's allowed to be. Again, defaults are as before. And here, our example. So we have inputs, Minecraft text, with a key text underscore, and the label is input text here. And we have a multi-line with a height of 100 at a max. If we do this, you can see we can input our text here. And at some point, after our 32 letters have been used up, we can't input anything anymore. So yeah, that is how this whole thing here works. So next up, Boolean. Lot simpler. So this is basically just a simple checkbox. Example will follow in a moment or a bit later. And here you can say, okay, what is the value you want to, well, send to whoever is using this later on when the checkbox is checked. So on true, you can define, okay, on true, send the color green. And on false, set the color red. The default values here are true and false, which in most cases is enough. Then you can also set the initial value, which is per default set to false this time. So here, example, inputs, we have Minecraft Boolean, key is Boolean underscore, and the label is true or false. Well, yeah, and that's how you can use this. Then single option. Here we have, again, as you can see, all optional. We have first the option to blank out the label as before. We can define the width of this element. And then we can, or we have to define the options. So this must be actually a non-empty list. So we have to have at least one entry in here. So list with at least one of those compounds here. And each of those compounds has at least an ID. This is basically the string value that is, well, sent to whoever is using the value. And it is also usually what is displayed on the input element itself. You can also set the display. This is basically the text that is on the input element. This per default is the same as ID if it's not set otherwise. And we can also set a initial value, but caveat here, this can only be set true for one single of those options. All other options must be false. If it's not set, then it's per default set true for the first in this list here. So, a bit too fast there. So let's see. So we have Minecraft single option. The key is single underscore. We have a label choose. And the options are diamond, emerald, and gold. And if we trigger this, you can see choose. This was our label, double point, emerald, gold, and so on. So you can see, you can just go through this. So pretty much the same as you can find in many other menus. Yeah, and then we have Minecraft number range, which needs at least a start and an end. This is basically a slider. Let me just show you quickly the example. So this is a slider like this here. And you can define or need to define the start value. So this is the lowest value. This is a floating number. You can also just add an integer, but internally this is a floating number. Then we have end. This is the highest number of your range. Again, a floating number. You can define a step size. If it's not defined, then you can use any kind of step size. So you can get very, very crazy numbers with many, many values behind the point, or digits behind the point. So I would recommend setting this to, for example, 1 if you just want 1, 2, 3, and so on, or similar. You can also set the initial value, and a little typo there, but you get the idea. So initial value per default, this is set to the middle of the range. That is something you should be aware of. If you have a range from 1 to 10, then this would be 5.5. So this could cause some issues if you are not aware of how this is actually calculated. Then we have the width again, which is just how wide the slider is. Again, default value 200. And then you can also define a so-called label format. This is basically the translation key used for this. I'm not really fluent when it comes to using translations in Minecraft. So I can't really tell you too much about this. So the default value here is options point generic value. But what this is about, I can't really tell you, unfortunately. So here, the example I just showed you, Minecraft number range. Key is number underscore, and the label is slider. And start is 1, end is 10, and the step is 0.5. And that is exactly what we get here. So our translation key basically turned this into label, then double point, space, and then the value. And that brings us to the last part for this episode, which are the actions triggered by clicking on a button in the menu. So these here are very similar to various click events in JSON text. So basically you take the JSON element or JSON component and replace action with type, and you already have the syntax for a dialog definition. So all of those here are, well, as you can see in the fancy brackets, compounds, and they have a type, and then depending on the type, they have additional information. So what can you do? Well, you can open an URL that is given with your default browser. You can run a given command, which doesn't even need the leading slash. You can also just suggest a command in the chat, so that opens the chat window and puts the suggested command in the chat window, overriding anything you have already pre-written in there. You can also just change the page if you're currently in a book to a given page. You can also copy the given value to the clipboard. And then, pretty new, obviously, you can also open another dialog. So type is show dialog, and then you define which dialog you want to open. So this can be a predefined dialog, and at least to the wiki, you can also actually define your dialog in there, but I wasn't able to actually get this work. On a side note there. Then finally, and that is of least interest for most, we have a type custom, which allows you to send custom packages to servers. This is only of interest for modded servers you want to remote control, since the vanilla servers don't expect anything like that. So you have the option to send an event with a given ID, and you can also add further payload to it in the form of a compound, I think. So this entirely depends on how your server was modded. Now, all of those here were static. There is also the option to add dynamic actions. So what are those? Well, they are somewhat similar to using input arguments or macros in functions. You will see an example in just a moment. But basically, you have a type dynamic run command with a template. And you will see this in a moment. This allows you to, for example, take the various values from your inputs and put them in specific points in your command and then execute the command with those inputs in mind. Similarly, we have dynamic custom. Now, this is rather special. This grabs all input elements, makes a compound with the key and the value, and sends all of this to the server. Furthermore, you can also, and that is somewhat optional, add additional information which is basically fixed and, well, static. So this again is only of interest for modded servers if you want to further control them in certain ways. And yeah, let's have a look at the example. So for this, I'm going to use my main menu chat formatter. And we will have a look at the actual file we are calling here in a moment. But let's just show this in action. So we have the chat formatter with a little bit of body at the top. And then we have our input text. And well, let's leave it at default. Let's write our ABCD in there. We want this bold, we want this in italic, and we want the color to be, let's go with gold. We have a number of 8, and then I can directly send this to the chat, or I can pre-check it. And this example is a slightly modified version from the German wiki, since it was rather impressive, and I think this makes sense to get an idea. So we have our predefined chat message. So here we have a quick recap of what we input, and our result, if we want, would be number 8 and then ABCD. And if you click on this, we will execute a corresponding command, and well, that is now our chat message we sent on the chat. I can also directly grab this and then just send it directly without pre-checking, and then that is directly sent off. Yeah, and with that, let's have a look at how all of this was fit together to get this little dialogue to round out in this episode here. And here we go. So this is our chat formatter.json file, which contains the definition for our chat formatter dialog from earlier. So let's just go from the top and have a look at the various values here. So first we have our type, which is multi-action, then a title and an external title. We can close this with escape, and then we already have our body. This body contains first an item, which is a brush with a couple components. So we have the enchantment glint override, and we have a lore, and the count is set to 1. Then we have a description, which is the message next to the icon. We show the decorations and the tooltip, as well as the width and the height. Then we have a text message, which is right below the item. And yeah, this is again just plain text. Then we get to the inputs. And of those we have several. So first we have a plain text input. The key for this is text. The label is input text. The label is visible. We have an initial value and we have a width, most of which are pretty much the default values, by the way. Then we have a Boolean, which is called bold. The default value is false, and yeah, on and true are once again the default values. Then the same for italic. And then we have a single option for the color of our choice. So key is color, the label is color again, label is visible, and our options are a list of various compounds with an ID, a display, and the display is just JSON text with a corresponding color. And this is just done for all of the different color options. And then we are through with the single option and get to a number range. So here, the key in this case is number, label format, a little bit different than the default, start and end. So from 0 to 10, with 1 as a step size, initial is 5, and the width is 200. And then we get to the actions, which is potentially the most interesting part. So our first action. So action is a list of actions, and the first action has the label send paycheck and a corresponding tooltip. And the action is a Minecraft dynamic run command. And this is where it gets interesting. So this here is the template. And this template, if you know Minecraft macros and functions, is pretty much what you would expect. The only thing that is missing is the $sign in the beginning. Leave it out, and you have basically the same syntax. So we have our tellrow command, and this here is where we are directly inserting the content, the value of our text input. Remember, the key of that one was just text. And then we have the next line, the true or false value of the checkbox for bold, and so on and so on. And the rest is just a simple put together tellrow command with some click events. And the second option or action is pretty much the same. Here we are just directly sending the message without the intermediate paycheck. Yeah, and that is pretty much the entire thing in a nutshell. So we have finished with the actions and are also done with the dialog. And with that, we've reached the end of this episode about dialogues. I hope you enjoyed it. I wish you a nice day, and well, see ya.